All right, we just got the first 2 rounds done at major/non-major event USDGC and Throw Pink. Let's give you the breakdown of what happened on FPO and MPO, because honestly it was just kind of weird. All right, so starting off with FPO, this should be a runaway victory for Evelina. She has had so many phenomenal fairway hits, gets amazing looks for birdies on nearly every single hole, and has only had a few OBs. But with that said, she has not capitalized on hardly any of those birdie opportunities, missing 8 circle 1 putts in her round 2. But she is still very much in the lead because her round 1 was that electric with 7 under, with a grand total of 9 birdies on the first round. But the players that are coming up right beside her are very much players that I did not expect. Starting with Miss Frisbees, Badensi has been playing lights out for her rating, and I think this might honestly be her best showing yet. And even though 3 under for 2 rounds probably doesn't sound that amazing, I think for her standards and the fact that this is effectively a major, this is phenomenal. There has been no lack of confidence. Every single putt feels like it's going to go the way that she wants it to. And even though I have some doubts about her ability to finish, I think there's definitely a world where she does podium, if not win. Very unlikely, but she could potentially win, which I did not expect on my bingo card. But to go along with that, another player that has been slowly dominating would be Rebecca Cox. She has definitely been playing a lot better than previous years this entire season, so it's definitely not insane to see a great performance here, but the way that she's been doing it has been very confident, very good putts, especially on hole 18 where she could have just taken a layup for bogey, but she is fighting for the win and she drains it from I think 40 feet away with a huge death putt. And even though of course Owen immediately followed that up with an easy 40-footer of her own, it did not matter because I think the confidence level has definitely boosted for Rebecca at that moment, and I think she definitely has what it takes to perform on these final 2 rounds. So again, I definitely don't expect her to win, but the ability for her to finish on the podium feels very real. And before we get to the top 3 players I think will most likely win/podium, let's talk about players that did not get even close, starting with Holland Hanley. Finishing her round 1 with a quad and a triple with 5 OBs and 1 hazard, that just put her so far away from any ability to be in contention. And even though she follows that up with a very good second round, it just doesn't matter. She's effectively out of it. And to go along with that, a player that you might expect to do a lot better, Haley King, even though she did card 2 eagles back to back in round 1, doesn't really matter. She finished that round with 6 over with 8 OBs. So this is probably the most fickle player you'll see in the entire competition. But with her being in 21st place, I would say there's no world where she even comes close. So she is effectively out of it as well. And despite Valerie having a very strong front 9 in the second round, she finishes with 3 bogeys in the back half and is currently sitting with 3 under, and I'm kind of thinking she's kind of out of it too. But a player that I definitely expected to be top of the leaderboards is Missy. Coming off of that insane win at Maple Hill, there's definitely an expectation for her to kind of succeed again, and I can't really say I've seen much of her in these first 2 rounds. But with a pretty lackluster 1 under in the first round, I was kind of counting her out, but she follows it up with a 4 under, which doesn't sound great, but that is one of the hottest rounds of the day, and so that puts her 5 strokes back in the lead. But the real contenders are Kristen, Owen, and Evelina. So Evelina, like I said, should be dominating this entire event, but that is just not the way it's been playing out because she's had so many failures on the putting green, missing 8 circle 1 putts. That is just insane, and I truly don't think her confidence levels are there despite having a phenomenal 7 under in the first round. But even though her putting was near the worst, she only cards 3 bogeys on the day, and it was actually 4 under through 11, and she would have been much more in the lead if it wasn't for one really bizarre but kind of expected play on hole 18 where she had a putt for birdie from 20 feet, and then she just totally airballs it into the OB, does a rethrow, and then makes that. But just the most airball of airballs right after Owen and Rebecca Cox jammed in a 40-footer. So despite her being very easily capable of leading by 4 strokes, she only leads by 2, with Owen being 2 strokes back and Kristen being 3 strokes back. So I have to say, Owen and Kristen are definitely not looking phenomenal. There were so many missed shots, especially hole 4 for Kristen, where she has basically like 3 tree hits in a row. That is just not something I ever expect for Kristen. And the fact that we kind of see this misstep again and again throughout these past couple of events, it's very shocking, very bizarre, but this seems to be the world that we live in, where Kristen is just not on top of her game, and I think it'll take an entire offseason to kind of rebuild that. But with that said, like always, she could still win this because she is only 3 strokes back, and like previous weekends, she could have made so many more strokes back, just was a little bit off on her circle 2. And like I said, Owen is in second place, but at no point in this second round did I think she was really excelling, but she has that manner about her where it doesn't really matter if she's playing good or bad, she's kind of just consistently playing better than the rest. And despite her getting 3 OBs, 4 bogeys, she still finishes 3 under, which is good, I guess. And that leaves her with 2 rounds to go and only 2 strokes back of Evelina. So definitely a world where she could win this, but I definitely think that Own needs to be making more of these circle 2 putts to really gain a lot of strokes in Evelina, because so many of her shots feel just a little bit short, a little bit less distance and accuracy than we kind of expect her to get, which is very much consistent with Kristen as well. So will they come back and clutch it up, or will Evelina kind of just run away with it? We'll see. I'm thinking Evelina has what it takes to take it down, because even though her putting is nearly the worst, it doesn't really matter because you are making every one of these shots get within circle 2, even circle 1 on so many of these holes that it's really hard to beat that. So with that, let's move on to MPO. All right, so now on to MPO, and honestly, there were just so many weird things, like Scott Conway carding a 16 on hole 12. I believe that's a dodeca-tuple bogey. That is a plus 12 on 1 hole. I really didn't even think that was possible. And speaking of blowups, Paul Macbeth cards a 7 on hole 17. He actually manages to be in a pretty good position after 2 rounds, putting himself in 16th place. But again, since there already is a decent amount of separation, he's still 10 strokes back to the leader. Speaking of legends, we have Das the Boss. I know you love and hate him. He's been on commentary for so long, and it is very rare that we actually get to see him truly perform. And no joke, he is doing amazing. For his standards, he is 38th after 2 rounds at 4 under, with the second round being 4 under with a 1031. And let me just tell you who he is beating: Germ, Alden, Simon, Thomas Gilbert, Gossage, Sexton, KJ, Ezra Robinson, Corey Ellis, Matty O, James Proctor. This is just insane. And yes, you obviously have to attribute some of that to the fact that all these players are kind of blowing up, but who cares? Nate Das the Boss may actually find a way to cash in this tournament, which you just do not expect. But it really goes to show that yes, he may be kind of annoying on coverage, but he is still very much a top tier player, at least compared to 99% of disc golfers. Next up, Cole gets a super insane ace in hole 7.
Going!
And then again on hole 17, he almost gets the ace, but just a little bit too far right, finishing his round at 12th, and I think this is pretty good. We know Cole is definitely fighting some injuries, and he's kind of got a lot on his plate, so I would not expect anything from him, so 12th is pretty darn good. But some players that did really good, but are still kind of out of it. We have Nicholas at 10 under, we have Joona Heinonen at 10 under, and despite Evan Smith getting a 1 over on the first round, he cards a 10 under to follow that up, even with a double on hole 5. And so yes, all these players are kind of out of it, like maybe Nicholas could totally clutch up, but probably not. And we love to see quality disc golf, even if it doesn't ultimately matter. But really, it comes down to the top 4 players, at least in my perspective, and a player that should have been there, and I cannot believe he is not there, is Ezra Aderhold. And boy, I was feeling like it was a lot more like, Ader, hold on. Just hold on. That is just something that he seems like he just cannot do, especially in these high stress situations where he knows that he's crushing, and that was very evident in the back half of his second round. Immediately after a very solid eagle on hole 10, he gets that super annoying double hazard, cards a bogey, and then he follows it up with another bogey. And just for some context, on the entire front 9, he was so dominant. He was leading by 2 strokes at one point, almost leading by more, and it felt like his entire game was just smooth and effortless. His putts were dialed dead center, he had no fear on all these shot shapes, and of course his power was as good as ever. But despite everything seeming like it was going well for him, it just went downhill quick on hole 15. And that was because his first shot was just a little bit too far right, didn't miss the Mando, but didn't make it. And then he has a second shot where it gets like 10 feet forward, still hasn't even passed the Mando. And then it was basically just disaster. He turns that into a triple bogey. And at this point, he was leading the event. And so he goes from 14 under to 11. And this is on a hole where the majority of these top tier pros are birdieing. So the fact that he loses basically 4 strokes in 1 hole was kind of the end of it. So hard to see this because we know it is just kind of like a mental thing. And like maybe he doesn't have the best focus and control of the disc. And he does kind of seem to favor power over control. But man, the entire front 9, it looked like everything was going super well for him. And then it all kind of fell apart. But before we get to the top 3 players, we have to talk about Nico. So Nico, love or hate him, he has actually won this event and showed so much promise year after year after year. And despite him being basically vacant this entire season, he shows up with a 10 under second round. And basically the only blemish was a bogey on 17, which is like totally fine. His putter was dialed, his super Anheuser approaches were looking effortless, and it truly felt like his confidence was on full display the entire day, going 12 for 12 from circle 1 and 2 for 4 from circle 2. But despite him doing very well, he is still 3 strokes back at the leaders, which are probably exactly who you guessed, Gannon and AB. So So honestly, I feel like Ganon's rounds, these first 2 rounds, are just insane. He has a couple of bogeys in the first round, a couple bogeys in the second round, and he honestly thinks he's having like bad rounds. But every putt from circle 2 is just perfect. It looks like he has literally never missed a circle 2 putt in his life, and he makes 21 for 22 from circle 1, with basically the only difference from round 1 to 2 being 2 less OBs. And with that, he gets the hot round with only 4 pars on the day. I truly don't think anybody can touch Ganon when he is in his flow state and making all these putts. So even though other players are very, very close, I just think Ganon's going to win this. And obviously he has won in the past, but a player that has won many times this year and is tied with him is AB. And obviously AB's distance and effortless shot shaping was on full display, but just like earlier in the season, he is dominating from circle 2, making 4 in his round 2, which included a 47 footer, and proving that yes, he may have had a decline later in the year, but it does not matter. He's truly one of the best disc golfers. And kind of a weird notion is that we haven't actually seen Ganon and AB kind of battle it out. We have seen a couple of events where they're pretty close, but really it's usually been Ganon that wins. So it's kind of crazy that we actually get to see a true Ganon versus AB battle, assuming that they don't fall off. But much like Ganon, I feel like AB just has full control of his disc. And for so many of these approaches, he's just throwing something overstable that just parks it, or throwing a slow speed mid that also parks it. But speaking of effortless, we do have to talk about Isaac, who is only 2 strokes back, but in very much Isaac fashion, I feel like he is just so effortless that you don't even notice that he's kind of crushing. And looking at his scorecard, it really is evidence of that. With just a couple of birdies sprinkled throughout the entire rounds, never carding the hot rounds, but just getting 8 under, 8 under, he's very much still in the battle. But much like Owen, you expect his putter to be dominating, and he's actually missed 7 circle 2 putts, which we obviously know he's very capable of making. And a crazy stat is that his longest putt in this second round was only 26 feet. But like I mentioned before, if I had to bet, I'm gonna pick on Ganon because he has been so dominant this entire season, and I feel like AB does have a tendency to kind of like wither away a little bit, at least in these most recent events. So I think Ganon will probably run away with it, but we will have to see because so many of these holes are really blow up or show up. And so that leads me to my final point, the course. I feel like so many of these events are kind of monotonous, kind of boring. I do feel like we've kind of outgrown this course and we kind of need to build something new or move to a different course. But I do have to say, every time we get to this course, it is interesting. It doesn't matter who's winning, who's losing. It is still very interesting. And it is crazy how one hole can seemingly end your entire tournament, especially hole 17. And it all becomes so interesting, so stressful, and so fun to watch. And I am so grateful that we were able to actually get this event because so many kind people were able to salvage the landscape and build it back to at least like 70-80% of what it used to be. That was very much not a guarantee. So I'm very grateful that we're able to get this, even though it should definitely be a major for FPO. So with that said, who do you think will take it down? And do you think or expect a world where we get Nico and Miss Frisbees to win this? That would be wild. Love to know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.